CBS News, I'm Charles Osgood. The Space Shuttle Challenger stands poised at Cape Canaveral for the launch of the 10th shuttle mission 1 hour from now. Chris Glenn is standing by at the Cape. Chris, what's going on right now?
Well, everything looks good, Charles. John Young and Bob Crippen are up in the weather observation plane right at the moment. They have the final call on whether the launch will go as planned or not, but everything looks good. We've got some clouds out over the ocean a little bit, which could impede their return to the Cape if they had to come back here for any reason and land right after launch, but everything else looks fine. This mission does have at least one sort of spectacular feature. Can you tell us about that, Chris? Absolutely spectacular. And untethered spacewalks, 2 of them, when 2 astronauts will be outside strapped into backpack Buck Rogers-like maneuvering units with little gas jets to propel them around, flying free in space with no tie lines back to the orbiter. Going to be great.
Well, we'll be listening just about an hour from now, a little less than that. Correspondent Chris Glenn there at Cape Canaveral. That shuttle is due to blast off in just about 59 minutes. More news in just a minute.
Sunrise here at the Kennedy Space Center finds everything looking good for the launch of America's 10th flight of the Space Shuttle. Challenger sits perched on pad 39A this morning. The crew is strapped into its seats. The hatch has been closed, and the countdown has moved into its final hour. Astronaut John Young will be flying in the shuttle training aircraft, checking out the weather, partly for launch, but mainly in case something goes wrong and the shuttle has to abort its flight, come back to the Cape. A light fog is still hanging over the Kennedy Space Center this morning, and an area of rain showers lingers just south of the Cape. NASA thinks that the rain will stay away at least until after the launch. NASA's decided to press ahead even though there's a problem over at Dakar, Senegal, the transatlantic abort site. That's the place where Challenger might have to land in case of trouble during launch. NASA's deciding to go ahead anyway, opting to avoid Dakar and fly around to Edwards Air Force Base in case of trouble. So right now all is well here at the Kennedy Space Center, some 52 minutes away from launch. And if the shuttle makes it into orbit this morning, it will mark the start of a busy schedule dotted with historic firsts. Wayne Dolcefino at the Johnson Space Center in Houston takes a look at the task ahead.
The delivery of 2 communication satellites, Palapa B for Indonesia and Westar VI for Western Union, will be the bread and butter of this space mission, but the real test for mission 41B, the 4th flight of the Challenger, is the testing of the manned maneuvering unit. Twice in the next 8 days, American astronauts will venture out of their spacecraft and fly away, unattached by any tether, using their gas-powered backpack to rendezvous with the West German SPAS satellite that will be waved in space by the big 50-foot Canadian arm. Our live continuous coverage of the launch will be looking at the militarization of space on the morning pole and the future of the Johnson Space Center during a special edition of the Talk of Houston. Make sure to join us during our live continuous coverage at 6:50 this morning. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
Good morning. This is a CBS News special report, the flight of the Shuttle Challenger. I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Once again, the familiar feeling of excitement beginning to build here at the Cape as the moment of launch straight up on the top of the hour draws ever nearer. It's going to be some flight featuring tetherless spacewalks for the first time. The 2 astronauts will be outside of the ship on 2 different occasions later in the week, unattached by any lifelines or tie lines back to the orbiter itself. Instead, they'll be strapped into huge, sort of cumbersome here on Earth. They weigh 330 pounds, but up there, of course, they weigh nothing. Backpacks, jet-powered backpacks, which they'll use to maneuver around a la Buck Rogers, rehearsing for the next mission coming up in a couple of months, in which an actual attempt will be made to repair a broken satellite as it sits on orbit. The crowds around the Cape ready to watch this launch seem larger than usual. Perhaps that's because it's the middle of the winter and Florida is very much in season, but they've got some of the excitement too. Here's what it sounded like.
You hear the roar, you feel the ground shake. You can't get that on TV.
I think it's really exciting that we're watching history being made.
It's more exciting each time that it goes up. Goosebumps come up on you, puts a knot in your throat, makes you feel good.
Makes you feel good. The reaction of some of the people lined on the roadways and the causeways around this very watery part of Florida, Cape Canaveral, ready to watch the space shuttle go up in just another 2 or 3 minutes. The crew this time is mostly composed of rookies. Only one of the 5 men aboard is a veteran of spaceflight. He's Vance Brand, 52 years old, the commander of the flight. He was previously on the Apollo-Soyuz joint flight with the Soviet spacecraft. a few years ago, and had a little bit of difficulty at the end of that flight during re-entry. Some poisonous gases got into the cabin, and Brandt and his other astronaut on board had to be hospitalized for a couple of days, but of course they were all right. The pilot, Robert Gibson, 37, his nickname of course is Hoot. He is married to an astronaut, Dr. Ray Seddon, who is scheduled to fly in August. 3 mission specialists. There is Robert Stewart, one of the spacewalkers, Ronald McNair, the second black American to go into space, and Bruce McCandless, a man who's been in the space program since 1966 and has worked very much developing this manned maneuvering unit backpack that we were talking about a moment ago. He's making his first flight also, and he will be one of the spacewalkers. My colleague Spencer Allen is at his usual position up atop the Vehicle Assembly Building, tallest point in the state of Florida, and he talked to us about why the Kennedy Space Center landing that's scheduled this time is important to NASA.
Well, it's a matter of logistics, Chris. After all, the VAB, the assembly building here, and all of the preparation for the shuttle launches takes place here at Kennedy. When they land out at Edwards, that means piggybacking that space shuttle back here over land is a time delay there, and they've got some fast turnarounds coming up for the rest of the year. So it is essential they land here so they can immediately get these things turned around and ready to go within 30 days.
What's the difference between the runway here at Cape Canaveral and the runway out in California?
Well, the runway they've been using out there, the dry lake bed at Dryden, it's very forgiving. You can be off course when you put down there, and then no great damage will be done. But here, this is very unforgiving. There's a swamp on one side, on the western side of it, with alligators in it. And on the east side, there are structures, sand dunes, and things of that kind. So if they don't make a precise landing here, it could be disastrous. There's no room for error.
About those alligators, this is right in the middle of the space complex, is right in the middle of a wildlife refuge. Space officials concerned at all about the wildlife here?
Yes, they are. They've expressed some concern in the past that wild pigs might occasionally come out on the runway here, come out of the swamp. They were left here by farmers when NASA bought this property years ago. But they've been gagging that there might be some pigs and alligators out here on the runway. But so far, we've never seen any.
Okay. Spencer Allen. Sounds like a pig in a poke to me.
42 seconds.
Okay, 42 seconds to go until the launch of the Challenger, which is making its fourth trip into space. This is the 10th flight of the shuttle, the 11th mission. Mission number 10 was scrubbed because they had some equipment problems. Let's listen to the launch countdown in its final seconds now.
23 seconds and counting. Orbiter computers now in command of the countdown. T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. We have a go for main engine start. 6, 5.
And the main engines are started. We see the flame at the bottom of the rocket, the familiar puff of white smoke billowing out from the sides of the launch pad. Brilliant orange flame as Challenger leaps off the pad, streaking into the sky once again, man into space. Spaceship pitching over as planned now to get on track. The familiar rumble and roar in the building shakes around us as the mighty engines thrust their way into space.
75% on the main engines. 30 seconds. On. Velocity 7.
Streaking into the sky now, straight up into the blue. No clouds in the way, just the plume of smoke that they're trailing behind us.
Probably 73%. Maximum aerodynamic pressure.
Max dynamic pressure there. The strongest rumbling and rattling the world getting. Even for a space vehicle. The shuttle goes much faster than the old moon rockets used to go because it's smaller and has a lot more of relative propulsive thrust behind it. So even as we speak, they're rising almost out of our line of sight. If the sky here in Florida wasn't so beautifully blue and clear this morning, we probably wouldn't be able to see them at this point.
1 minute, 23 seconds, velocity 2,300 feet per second. Altitude 11 nautical miles, downrange distance 9 nautical miles.
The throttle is open to 104%, they say, And that's pushing them up into orbit. Of course, they have those solid rocket boosters strapped alongside of the main fuel tank. And both sets of tanks will drop away eventually out over the Atlantic. The SRBs will be recovered. The main tank will be left to sink into the sea. Here comes the solid rocket booster separation in about 3 seconds.
Roger, PC.
We can still see them as they fly away, still see the flame of that rocket, just a pinpoint of light far, far away, high up in the sky now.
Solid rocket booster separation confirmed.
The solid rocket boosters have fallen away. There is a convoy of ships in the ocean waiting for them to parachute down to the surface of the sea, and they'll pick them up, bring them back, and they'll be used again another day.
2 minutes, 35 seconds, velocity 4,700 feet per second, downrange distance 48 nautical miles.
At this point, they have a 2-engine transatlantic abort capability. In other words, if something goes wrong aboard the spacecraft at this point, they could get over to the landing site in Dakar, Senegal, with only 2 engines operating. There was some concern about the weather at Dakar, but given the smoothness of this flight so far, it seems unlikely that they will have to use that.
5,200 feet per second, downrange distance 70 nautical miles, altitude 39 nautical miles.
Let's talk a little bit about what they hope to accomplish on this flight. We spoke before the launch about the spectacular spacewalks that are planned untethered to the ship. That's later in the week. This backpack arrangement that they're going to be using was some 15 years in development. A primitive version of it was flown inside the Skylab orbital workshop back in the 1970s. It looks almost like a giant metal claw which grasps the astronaut around the shoulders and the legs. And there are 2 metal arms which come out. The astronaut puts his arms inside the metal arms, and there's a controller for his hands on each side. The left hand one controls motion of the propulsion jets of the backpack, forward, back, sideways, and up and down. The other one controls the yaw, pitch, and roll of the thing. And they can set it. It has a little brain all its own. They can set it so when they're working on something, a broken satellite or something, they can set it to hold the attitude that they're in, no matter what that attitude may be, and it'll just sit there in space as long as they want it to. It's quite an accomplishment, quite a spectacular achievement for the scientists on this flight. They'll be doing some other things too. The primary objective of the flight, forget the spectacular part of the spacewalks, is to deploy 2 communication satellites. Another one from Indonesia, Palapa B2 it's called, and the Western Union communication satellite. The third one, Westar, will also be launched using that spring-loaded spinning platform arrangement with which they've so successfully launched satellites before from the shuttle cargo bay. Some interesting experiments this time. One of them involves, it's a student experiment. It involves rats and the study of the effects of zero gravity on arthritis. They'll take these laboratory rats and give them some kind of preparation that makes them seem to have arthritis and see whether it's alleviated at all by the zero G up there in space. Quiet now. Everything is going well. Mission control and the astronauts communicating less frequently.
Altitude 55 nautical miles, downrange distance.
They're about a minute past the point where they could return to the Cape and land here without going into orbit if they wanted to.
Cells running normally.
Pretty soon they will have the call from the ground, press to MECO. That means you are go until you reach main engine cutoff, which comes about 8.5 minutes into the flight.
Single engine TAL call.
There will also be another interesting aspect to this flight. There will be 2 non-NASA cameras aboard. A Cinema 360 is the name of the system, and it's to provide a test for motion picture photography in a unique format, which is primarily designed for planetarium viewing, you know, when you sit there and look up at the dome vaulted ceiling. It's the first time that non-NASA commercial cameras have ever flown, as far as anybody knows.
Atlantic crossing and land at the Dakar TAL site if necessary, although the weather at that site is not good this morning.
Mission Control talking about a possible landing at Dakar, and they're still saying that the weather is not good there, so let's hope they don't have to go there, but it doesn't look like they have to. We're still seeing pictures from the NASA cameras on the television receiver here, although the spaceship itself is long since out of sight, and the main engines are still burning. Everything is looking good.
Expected at 8 minutes, 42 seconds.
So that would leave us with perhaps another minute and a half, minute 45 seconds until the main engine shut down, and they are to go for orbital.
The Challenger could press on the main engine cut off if only one engine were operational.
There's the press to MECO call. So at this point, if anything went wrong, what they would do is they would go into orbit and at least go once around, coming back to land either at Edwards Air Force Base in California or here at the Cape.
Three engines at 100%.
As we said, though, it doesn't look like anything's going wrong at this point. When they do hit that MECO point, that main engine cutoff, they'll be traveling at a velocity of 25,735 feet per second.
Velocity,
that's fast.
18,000 feet per second. Downrange distance, 520 nautical miles. Altitude, 57 nautical miles.
57 miles since they left the Cape, plus whatever
down
the altitude mileage is.
3G force on the spacecraft.
They've throttled back the main engine somewhat now. They do this at this point in the flight plan every single flight because they don't want to put any more than 3 Gs, 3 times the force of gravity onto the astronauts and the equipment and the experiments aboard the ship. Still, we can see the picture on the NASA television cameras.
58 nautical miles altitude, 647 miles downrange, velocity 22,000 feet per second.
And now even the NASA cameras have lost sight of the spaceship as it heads out carrying the 5 astronauts, Vance Brand, Hoot Gibson, Bob Stewart, Ron McNair, and Bruce McCandless. We're coming up now in just about 15 seconds or so on the main engine cutoff. And we are standing by, as is NASA. Here it comes.
We got a MECO.
There you go.
Roger, copy MECO.
Main engine cutoff now. Okay.
Cutoff confirmed.
We'll have the external fuel tank, the giant fuel tank that the space shuttle itself clings to on launch like a moth on a branch. That'll be falling away and lost in the sea pretty soon now.
Tank separation.
And then in a few more minutes, they will do what they call the OMS 1 burn, the final step using the onboard engines to put them into their first orbit. They'll refine that with some more OMS burns later. So, all right, man in space once again, the flight of the Challenger. This is the 10th flight of the space shuttle. The mission is called 41B, and all is well. I'm Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Well, they are calling it the smoothest countdown and the smoothest launch in NASA history. The machine worked perfectly, firing its big engines at precisely 7 o'clock this morning, Houston time, shaking the ground for miles around the Cape. The shock wave rumbling along a crowd estimated at up to 100,000. NASA's Tom Utzman, as a matter of fact, is almost surprised.
If somebody had told us a year ago or 2 years ago that we'd be flying with this frequency with a machine that was acting this good, I could have won a lot of money if I'd bet that way. So we feel very happy with it.
Challenger is now sending down its first TV pictures showing that the big payload bay doors have been opened up, exposing the 2 satellites that will be kicked out of the Challenger later on. The first of those birds, the Westar VI, owned by Western Union, will be deployed sometime this afternoon. Reporting live from the Kennedy Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
CBS News, this is Judy Muller. The Challenger is in orbit the first day of an 8-day mission. Christopher Glenn reports.
The Challenger crew at this point has accomplished a critical task, opening the long folding doors to the cargo bay. If the attempt had failed, they would not have been able to deploy radiators, which keep the temperature inside the spacecraft from rising to a dangerously hot level. But then everything about this flight has been successful so far.
If somebody had told us a year ago or 2 years ago that we'd be flying with this frequency with a machine that was acting this good, I could have won a lot of money if I'd bet that way. So we feel very happy with it.
Tom Utzman, NASA's Shuttle Operations Director. The major task left for the crew today before their first sleep period is to deploy a commercial communications satellite for Western Union. They'll launch another one for the government of Indonesia tomorrow. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
Chifino live at the Johnson Space Center. Chris Peterson, Doug Miller here too. Back after the news from CBS. This is KTRH Houston. It's 10 o'clock.
CBS News, this is Doug Poling. The environment had a smooth launch from the Kennedy Space Center this morning. 5 astronauts blasted off 3 hours ago to begin the 10th flight in the shuttle program. Jay Jones reports on what's happening now.
Challenger is 165 nautical miles high over the Pacific right now, above the Hawaiian Islands in its third orbit, heading in the direction of Mexico. The crew has been bending to the task of getting the orbiter into spaceship shape, stowing gears, setting up antennas, throwing switches. Here at Kennedy, Launch Director Robert Seek talked about the almost flawless beginning of Mission 41B.
The final count was as smooth as the pre-count activities. There were no significant changes, contingencies, or problems that required dispositioning.
In a few hours, the crew will have its chance to live up to the unofficial shuttle motto, "We deliver," when they place in orbit Westar VI, a communications satellite. Jay Jones, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
The Space Shuttle Challenger gets down to work this afternoon, launching the first of 2 communication satellites carried aloft in the shuttle's cargo bay. The second satellite will be boosted into orbit late tomorrow.
CBS News, I'm Dallas Townsend. The Space Shuttle Challenger, after a flawless launch this morning, have just deployed the first of 2 communication satellites. Details from Jay Jones at the Kennedy Space Center.
Challenger has just deployed Westar VI.
The payloads officer reports a good deploy from the data.
Back with a report, a few minutes.
Copy that, and looks good to us.
Crew affirms good deploy.
Westar VI is a business communications satellite capable of handling voice and color television transmissions. It was a fascinating process. A table in the shuttle's payload made the satellite spin to give it gyroscopic stability, and then 4 powerful springs just propelled the spinning Westar out of the bay. In about 45 minutes, the satellite's own kick motor will fire, and it's a strong kick, enough to drive Westar to an altitude of more than 22,000 miles. Later, onboard thrusters will maneuver the satellite into a stationary position above the equator. Westar VI is the 3rd advanced Western Union satellite to be put into orbit. And how much money is the company saving through shuttle delivery? NASA says $12 million. It would cost $30 million to orbit Westar by rocket, $18 million by shuttle. Another payload for Indonesia. A similar communications satellite is ready for delivery tomorrow. Jay Jones, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
4 barrels of oil a day. Trends in new technology. Colorado-based Western Energy Development and some independent researchers working to develop a commercial process to remove sulfur from crude oil.
We'll have to get back with Chris in a little bit, having some technical problems there. We will talk with him later on in the afternoon about the shuttle mission.
News from space continues to be good for the Johnson Space Center ground controllers. A flawless launch, a problem-free day, and the deployment last hour of the Westar VI communication satellite.
Payloads officer reports a good deploy from the data.
Back with a report, a few minutes.
Copy that, and looks good to us.
Crew affirms good deploy.
And about 20 minutes ago, the rocket motor on Westar's Payload Assist Module ignited, boosting the satellite to an eventual orbit 22,300 miles overhead. The astronauts, meanwhile, are getting ready to retire for the night, having awakened at 1:30 this morning for the launch of Challenger. Saturday will find the crew at it again, this time deploying a Palapa satellite for the nation of Indonesia. From the Johnson Space Center live, Chris Peterson, KTRH News.
CBS News, this is Mitchell Krause. NASA says the unmanned communications satellite, which the shuttle launched into orbit for Western Union, does not respond to radio signals and may be lost.
We don't know at this point whether the satellite is in its proper orbit and has experienced a failure of its transmitting devices that would send the signals that would allay all our concerns and tell us that it's where it's supposed to be and operating properly, or whether in fact there has been some other kind of malfunction and the satellite is lost.
NASA spokesman Jim Ball said areas of the sky where the satellite should be in are being searched, but so far without success. Western Union says the $75 million telecommunications satellite, which cost an additional $10 million to launch, is covered by insurance. As for the astronauts aboard the Challenger, they had started their sleep period when the satellite problem was discovered. It's not likely to affect the rest of their mission, although it might delay the launch of another satellite that the government of Indonesia originally set for tomorrow. More in a minute.
5. We have main engine start. 3, 2, 1, 0. We have solid rocket booster ignition and liftoff of Challenger and the 10th Space Shuttle flight. And the shuttle has cleared the tower.
They're calling it the smoothest launch in history. Even Florida's fickle weather was cooperative today. A crowd estimated at up to 100,000 watched the bright yellow flash, saw the steam billow thousands of feet into the air, felt the ground shudder with the shock waves, and watched Challenger rise into the sky on the 10th flight of the space shuttle. It was so smooth that NASA's Tom Utzman was almost surprised.
If somebody had told us a year ago or 2 years ago that we'd be flying with this frequency with a machine that was acting this good, I could have won a lot of money if I'd bet that way.
So the shuttle is now off on its 8th-day flight. 8 hours after launch, the time came for Challenger to pay its freight.
Payload officer reports a good deploy from the data.
Back with a report in a few minutes.
Copy that, and looks good to us.
Crew affirms good deploy.
This is Chris Peterson. It had seemed too good to be true. A perfect day, a perfect deploy, and a check for $10 million on the way. That's how much NASA gets for deploying a satellite like the Westar VI, which went out of the shuttle's payload bay a minute before 3 today. The only problem is Western Union now says it can't find it. Westar's owners thought they had their satellite on their tracking screens around 4 this afternoon after a solid rocket motor had ignited, giving the spacecraft its first boost into orbit. But it turned out to be a false echo. Now, every NASA tracking station on Earth, as well as NORAD Defense, is scanning the skies for the satellite. Western Union does have a $100 million insurance policy on the craft, and NASA responsibility for the satellite ended when deployment was confirmed by both crew and mission control. So in summary, Western Union can't find their satellite, NASA says it's not responsible, and the agency is questioning whether it wants to go ahead and deploy the similarly constructed Palapa satellite tomorrow. Otherwise, the crew will have a lighter side to the workload Saturday. They're called out in their flight plan to perform some basic checks on something called an animal enclosure module. That's space talk for a rat cage. The shuttle is carrying rats in space this time as part of a student experiment designed to research the effects of zero gravity on arthritis. Previous shuttle crews had expressed discomfort at being asked to share their quarters with the furry critters, but the 41B astronauts apparently had no such worry. Sunday is a very light activity day for the men, designed to be so they will not burn out before the rigorous week-long schedule of spacewalks and experiments begins early Monday morning. From the Johnson Space Center, Chris Peterson, KTRH News.
It's 10:09 at KTRH, and still to come on the Friday night report, the Oilers have a new quarterback.
Houston. CBS News, I'm Neil Strasser. It now appears that it's a case of sorting through the space junk in the hunt for that communication satellite lost shortly after its launching yesterday from the space shuttle. Jay Jones reports.
Tracking stations around the world are still searching for Westar. The North American Air Defense Command's sensitive and powerful radar system has picked up what are called some passive targets in an area where the lost communications satellite may be. Passive means these objects are not transmitting. The task now would be to identify which is Westar, if indeed it is one of the blips on the radar screens. A NASA technical advisor, Jim Mizell, says he's confident that NORAD will eventually find Westar, but then the trick would be to activate it. It is possible the satellite's antennas are pointing the wrong way due to a maneuvering engine misfire, but NASA is not at all certain. Engineers are still checking Westar's sister satellite, Palapa B2, owned by Indonesia. It will not be deployed today as scheduled. No decision yet on tomorrow, the next opportunity. Jay Jones, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
one satellite already lost in space. The second satellite that was supposed to have been sprung out of Challenger's cargo bay today now won't be deployed until tomorrow. NASA says that decision was made by the Indonesian government, the owners of the Palapa communications satellite nestled inside the shuttle. The extra day is supposed to buy time for technicians to check out what went wrong with the Westar satellite or its booster. That's the Western Union bird that vanished shortly after its booster was supposed to have fired it into a stationary orbit above the Earth. Tracking stations around the world are now scanning the skies for a sign of that wayward bird. All they've found, that they're sure of at least, is a bunch of space junk. Meanwhile, Challenger's crew has been looking down at the Earth.
Houston, Challenger, look up. We're coming right over you. You can see Galveston Bridge.
Roger, understand, and you look good up there.
Their schedule has been juggled around today to try to buy some extra time, the time that they lost, or the time that they gained, actually, whenever they canceled or postponed the deployment of that Indonesian satellite that was supposed to have been deployed today. It's been rescheduled for tomorrow. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
John Bohannon. Communication satellite may now be space junk. Radar has picked up 17 pieces of debris that apparently are from the Westar VI satellite launched yesterday from the Space Shuttle Challenger. It's been missing since the launch. NASA spokesman Randy Stone.
Any conjecture that we can make about the objects that we're seeing on radar at this time is purely subjective until we can get more information and have it analyzed by our sources.
The loss of the satellite has forced the postponement of today's scheduled release of a second satellite. Some reports indicate that the satellite's rockets might have exploded.
CBS News, I'm Carol Pazewski. A second communications satellite was to have been launched from the Space Shuttle Challenger today, but the first satellite, called the Westar, disappeared immediately after it was launched. Now, NASA officials say they want to learn more about what caused the problem before possibly creating new ones.
It's just prudent in an engineering sense when you have a failure on one vehicle and you have another vehicle that's identical to it, to try to understand what happened to the one that has a problem and then check back through your records to see if there's some generic correlation you could make there.
That's Flight Director Randy Stone. Radar dishes are tracking chunks of orbital space debris, which NASA says may be what's left of the lost satellite. Western Union owns the missing device, which cost $75 million. More news after this. CBS News, I'm Carol Pazewski. There was more furious fighting. CBS News, I'm Carol Pazewski. NASA officials say they believe they've located what's left of a communications satellite missing since its launch yesterday from the Space Shuttle Challenger. They say parts of the Westar VI have been traced by radar, trailing the shuttle in orbit. Western Union owns the multi-million-dollar Westar, and spokesman Don Dutcher says customers will suffer no loss if the satellite is not salvaged. Furthermore, Dutcher says another company's satellite is in the works.
We have a contract with Hughes Aircraft to build Westar VII, and one of the things under an examination or exploratory situation at the moment is the possibility of it advancing that date of the launch of Westar VII, which is scheduled now for the fall of 1985 in November.
The disappearance and long search for the Westar forced the postponement of another satellite deployment today. More news after this.
Satellite, I'm Dave Chester. Indonesia has given the green light for the launch of a second communications satellite from the Space Shuttle Challenger early Monday. That second communications craft is owned by that country and is identical to a Western Union satellite launched and lost on Friday. Bill Ziegler, Westar mission controller, said in Houston that the efforts have been continuing to get the wayward satellite working, if that's even possible.
We are attempting to put in commands to change the configuration to charge batteries. And of course, if we get during daylight,
and the favorable attitude of the sun to the solar rays, we should be able to get voltage and battery up and so forth.
Bill Ziegler, who is the mission controller for Westar VI, the missing satellite, he's in Houston. A ground station picked up signals from Westar VI on Saturday, but it wasn't known if the craft was still in one piece. In any case, they say if it can't be revived, it can't be retrieved. This is Mutual News. Mutual News via satellite. I'm Dave Chester. Now given the green light for the launch of a second communications satellite belonging to that country from the Space Shuttle Challenger in Earth orbit. The launch will be sometime early Monday. That second communications craft, owned by Indonesia, is identical to a Western Union satellite launched and lost on Friday. NASA and Western Union officials now believe that the missing Westar VI satellite will not be salvaged. NASA spokesman Mitch Barnes told Mutual News Sunday morning Eastern Time that the space agency now believes it has in fact located what's left of the 3.5-ton multi-million-dollar missing Westar VI satellite.
Well, several large pieces and several smaller ones fall in the orbit around in exactly the same orbit as the shuttle, so it is believed that Westar did blow up, and this is it in the same orbit as Challenger.
Mitch Barnes, a spokesman with NASA at the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is Mutual News.
CBS News, I'm Neil Strasser.
Like the balloon blew up, I'm tracking a very large piece of plastic. It's painted white on one side and dark olive drab to black on the other side.
Astronaut Bruce McCandless reporting a second disappointment for the crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger. Friday, through no fault of the astronauts, a communication satellite they ejected was subsequently lost. This morning, they ejected a balloon that was to be used to rehearse the capture and repair of a disabled satellite in the next mission. But for reasons unknown, shortly after the inflation of the 6-foot Mylar plastic balloon began, it blew up. The experiment canceled. Tomorrow, the astronauts will launch another communication satellite, just like the one which apparently experienced a rocket failure on Friday. The Indonesian owners made the decision to take the risk and go ahead. The Soviet Union will soon have men back in space. Radio Moscow says another manned space mission will be launched to the Soyuz space station in the near future. As usual, no announcement in advance of a definite launch time. CBS News continues in a moment.
It was supposed to have been a big day for the Challenger crew, the day it would automatically inflate a balloon, set it free so that it could later be chased down in orbit. Blurry TV pictures beamed back to the Earth showed the balloon inflate and float away. But something was wrong. Astronaut Bruce McCandless reported.
Looks like the balloon blew up. I'm tracking a very large piece of plastic. It's painted white on one side and dark olive drab to black on the other side.
So the rendezvous has been scrapped, and no one is sure what happened to a 200-pound weight that was supposed to have been attached to the balloon. It's apparently not there. There are fears it might be floating around outside of the shuttle, and that poses the danger that the Challenger might find it the hard way by firing up its maneuvering engines and bumping into it. Meanwhile, the deployment of the Indonesian Palapa satellite that was supposed to have been rescheduled for today has now been rescheduled once again for tomorrow. This because of the Westar problems. Western Union now believes that its satellite, its once missing satellite, is broken apart in orbit, possibly because of an explosion. All of this means that NASA is now rejuggling its schedule because of all of those problems in the still young 10th flight of the Space Shuttle. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
CBS News, I'm Neil Strasser. The lost is found, but there's no chance, NASA officials say, of salvaging that wayward communication satellite. Jay Jones has more from the Kennedy Space Center.
NASA Flight Director Randy Stone says he's as sure as he can be that radar is tracking Westar or its remains. There are two principal objects on the radar screens in an elongated orbit, 600 miles by 150 miles. One is Westar, the other its Payload Assist Module. Stone says in all there are 13 objects.
The two larger objects, and then 11 other smaller objects that are scattered from about 25 minutes in front of the orbiter to about 50 minutes behind the orbiter. So they're a large distance in feet and miles from the orbiter.
So Challenger appears to be in no danger from the remnants of Westar, the satellite that's been lost since deployment late Friday. Stone says there has been no radio contact with Westar, that an earlier report of a weak signal was false. Jay Jones, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
The shuttle project today, an inflatable balloon ejected from the spacecraft blew into pieces, foiling a plan to rehearse the sort of approach that will be necessary when the next shuttle mission tries to capture and repair a currently disabled satellite. CBS News continues in a moment.
From the satellite's owner, Western Union, admitted it to KTRH yesterday. Now NASA is admitting it too. They're not sure, but they think that the Westar has been torn apart, scattered over a wide path in an unusual oblong orbit. Flight Director Randy Stone says the biggest piece of that debris is about 16 feet square.
That object is believed to be the Westar. It is rotating at about 20 RPMs. The other object, the smaller object, is about 2.5 square meters in size, and it is suspected to be the PAM.
The PAM that Stone is talking about is the Payload Assist Module, the booster that was supposed to kick Westar into a seemingly stationary fixed orbit above the Earth. So the once missing satellite and its booster apparently separated. That's what was supposed to happen after the booster fired. But it's still unclear what went wrong or whether the booster actually did fire. But the owners of the second satellite stowed in the shuttle have decided to take a chance it won't happen again. The Indonesian Palapa B is scheduled to be sprung out of the shuttle sometime tomorrow. That satellite wasn't the only thing that might have been an explosion. A balloon that was supposed to have been kicked out of the shuttle's cargo bay today so that it could be chased down in a rendezvous test later on in the mission apparently tore apart after it went out of the cargo bay. A big disappointment, another one for this flight of the Challenger. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
CBS News, I'm Morton Dean. Lebanon, a communication satellite launched by the Space Shuttle Challenger, may have been found. 2 large chunks believed to be the satellite and its platform are being tracked in a low orbit. But as far as its original purpose goes, the satellite is no better found than lost.
There is no capability of boosting it into the geosynchronous orbit, which is 22,300 miles above the Earth, which is its operating point. So from that standpoint, as a communication satellite, it's lost.
Len Sedstad of NASA says officials are still planning to launch an Indonesian satellite from Challenger tomorrow. Another problem in space today, a balloon designed to simulate a satellite blew up after it was released by the shuttle. The balloon would have been used as a target to test new radar equipment that will be used on future shuttle missions.
NBC News. I'm Sam Hall. Space shuttle flight today, a balloon apparently exploded shortly after being released into cargo bay, so astronauts will not be able to practice a rendezvous. NASA officials think they found parts of the Westar VI satellite, which exploded after being launched from the Challenger, and correspondent David Weber in London says that loss is painful.
There are some long faces around the big London underwriter's office. The loss of Westar could go down as one of the really big claims in the long history of Lloyd's of London. Stephen Merritt of the group specializing in satellite insurance lays it all out.
The insured value of the satellite, as I understand it, is a little over $100 million. Of that, approximately half is insured directly into the London market. And of that half, most of it is probably in Lloyd's.
Merritt says there's roughly the same coverage on the Indonesian satellite due to be launched later, but he says the insurers have no qualms about that one. David Weber, NBC News, London.
And I'm Sam Hall, NBC News.
NASA has decided to go ahead with the deployment of the Indonesian Palapa communication satellite tomorrow. It was originally set to be launched from the shuttle's payload bay Saturday, but the loss of the Westar satellite deployed Friday caused Indonesian officials to rethink their position about going as planned. About an hour ago, Capcom Mary Cleve in the Mission Control Center told the crew the new plan.
The suggestion that was made about getting a 50D deploy on the Palapa earlier to you by Jerry is now official, and we got a note from the Palapa folks, and we are going to attempt a 50D deploy tomorrow.
A 50D deploy simply means the Palapa will be kicked out of the Challenger's cargo bay on the 50th orbit of the Earth. That would mean a launch at 9:13 Monday morning. In the meantime, the astronauts are nearing their scheduled sleep time, a time when they normally sacrifice sleep in favor of looking out the window in awe. Live from the Johnson Space Center, Chris Peterson, KTRH News. Out on a downside when an inflatable balloon to be used as a target for rendezvous maneuvers blew apart. That was really not so surprising, since NASA sources tell KTRH there'd been numerous problems with it on the ground prior to the flight. So, with Commander Vance Brand unable to perform the activities he had expected, the crew took care of other odds and ends and had a relatively relaxed day. But just before they went to bed, the crew got this news from Capcom Mary Cleve in Mission Control.
They have found the spacecraft, and the spacecraft is separated now and is in an orbit of 155 by 600 miles. It was received by the Hughes station in Fillmore, California, and the batteries are charging up, and the bus currents look good, but it is in a 155 by 600.
She's talking about the Westar VI satellite missing since Friday. So the Westar is now technically space junk, with no hope of rescuing it. The crew's asleep now, looking forward, no doubt, to launching the Palapa satellite out of the shuttle's cargo bay tomorrow morning at 9:13. From the Johnson Space Center, Chris Peterson, KTRH News.
CBS News, this is Mitchell Krause. Police...
The satellite has been positively identified by the Fillmore, California tracking station owned by Hughes Aircraft. For 2 days now, NORAD, NASA, and private industry have been looking at numerous pieces of debris orbiting the Earth close to the shuttle Challenger. Saturday, it was confirmed that whatever remained of Westar VI was somewhere in that debris. Today, Western Union says they're reasonably sure they have a healthy satellite in the wrong orbit, an orbit that will make the satellite totally useless to the company. But what went wrong? Western Union's Bill Ziegler has a guess.
My opinion is that the PAM failed, probably a NASA failure.
If that's the case, the makers of the Payload Assist Module, known as a PAM, may have some trouble on their hands. McDonnell Douglas of St. Louis has had a good track record up until now with their device, but tomorrow's Palapa satellite also will use the PAM.